After 3 months of protests in the streets, has the Hong Kong government finally been coerced by the crowds to do the right thing? I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, has agreed to withdraw the extradition bill, which was ostensibly the cause of the protests that have gone on in the streets now, that have received a response from police of water cannon and tear gas, and in some cases rubber bullets. There have been some 5 people who have committed suicide for the cause, so to speak, and the people of Hong Kong seem to have gotten what they initially requested. It is not the case. There are 4 more demands on their list. And Bill, don't you think the protesters should consider this good enough and quietly go back to their jobs?
Well, needless to say, I don't think that at all.
And why not? Because actually, the governor, essentially, the CEO, the chief executive of Hong Kong, has finally caved to the most significant demand, which was that extradition deal that would have sent people back to mainland China to stand trial under a governance system that is different in this one nation, 2 systems. Why not leave well enough alone and say, you know what, we don't really need an independent investigation into police reaction to these protests. We don't really need to have direct elections of all lawmakers. We've gotten something, and maybe we'll get something more later.
That's kind of like saying, we fought for the Bill of Rights, and we got 3 of them. We lost on the guns thing, and we lost on the Fifth Amendment protections against self-incrimination, lost on the First Amendment, but we did get, unreasonable search and seizure, so perhaps we ought to just call it a day and see if the British turn out to be nicer people in the future. Things just don't work that way. The power of the Hong Kong protest is the protest, and they're in the streets now, and the world's eyes are on them now. And I don't know whether any of those claims are negotiable, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm not familiar with exactly what those claims are and how deeply committed they are to all of them. But I know that if you're willing to risk your life and commit suicide over something, those are pretty core principles. And if somebody told me that I got 1 out of 5 of my core principles and you should be satisfied and happy, I don't think I would. I don't think I'd agree with that.
Well, this is what the protesters have been saying. I think every night at 10 o'clock, they would literally throw open their windows and shout 5 demands, not 1 less. The demands include independent investigation into the police response to these protests, amnesty for arrested protesters, and there may be some 1,100 or more of those, and direct elections for all lawmakers and the chief executive. Bill, it seemed like Chinese President Xi Jinping the other day, Tuesday, in a speech that he gave to a group of students, seemed to signal some flexibility that may have resulted in Carrie Lam's action here. He basically said, on principles, we are unbending, but on tactics, we can be flexible. Are these protesters starting to get to Mr. Xi?
Well, I think they're certainly getting to him. And what a charming thing to say. On our principles, we are unflexing. In other words, everything that you're agitating for, we utterly reject. And we might be willing to toss you a bone or 2 in order to save us the trouble of having to come in and do it with tanks and stuff. I'm the idea that an entire nation of people, because Hong Kong was an independent nation for quite a long time, a British protectorate anyway, would have the social discipline to have everybody, which is a brilliant idea, by the way. Needless to say, reminds me enormously of the movie Network, when everybody just rolled up their windows and started screaming, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." That is an indication that these are serious issues. And for the Chinese government to say, we don't really much care about your issues, we're basically saying, we'll be willing to give you we'll toss you a bone, but that doesn't mean we agree with you. That doesn't mean we think that you've got any case whatsoever. And if I'm a Hong Kong protester, what that's telling me is, it's telling me that what the Chinese government wants is they want me off the streets. They want the protest to end. They know it's bad for their image. They know it's bad for their economy. What they want is to bring this thing to a peaceful close. And then once the thing is brought to a peaceful close, generally speaking, states like the Communist Chinese state move relatively quickly to make sure that the people that launched this demonstration don't get a chance to launch another one. This would be why I imagine they're interested in the investigating the police response to this. I think it's especially the reason why they're talking about amnesty for protesters. In America, if you come out and protest the president, we don't. We not only don't throw you in jail unless you're smashing property, but even if you did smash property and went to jail, we don't send assassination teams after you 2 weeks or 2 months later to make sure you don't do it again. The reality of life in China is the reality of life under socialist control, under this bizarre hybrid of capitalism and communism they have. But it has absolute and total political control. And if you think that those people won't be dealt with in the harshest manner possible, you don't know anything about either the Chinese or about socialist systems.
There's a texting app, essentially a social media app called Telegram, and I've been following a channel called Guardians of Hong Kong. It only has about 11,000 subscribers, but it is very active in posting information about what's going on with the protest and links to stories about it. There's a poster that somebody made, a meme that says 5 demands, not one less. Our friends that died for the cause will never forgive us if we accept those terms from the government. And Bill, there was one more thing here that struck me, and I couldn't find the actual video of it. They had a still picture of it, that as school began for the new school year at one school in Hong Kong, the students apparently, when they were supposed to be singing the school song or the national anthem, actually began singing, "Do you hear the people sing?"
Oh, my God. That quote, how could we ever forsake the friends who died for this cause by taking less than what they were ready to die for? And that sentence could have come from the American Revolution. There were a number of demands on King George, and he spat in the face of the colonists, much the same way that the Chinese government, mainland Chinese government, is spitting in the face of the protesters by saying, we remain inflexibly opposed to everything, but we might be willing to give you a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So that's like the American colonists submitting their petition to King George doing what he did, basically throwing it back in our faces and saying, hey, if you want to get uppity, then you'll all hang from trees. And once that threshold is crossed, and once blood has been shed, the stakes are much, much higher. And this is how you get into both massacres and revolutions and successful revolutions, good revolutions, like the revolution in Czechoslovakia after the Soviet Union or Poland, that kind of thing. When political demands are met with lethal force, it's not about politics anymore. Now it's about primal human instincts of loyalty and commitment, sacrifice, all of these things. And for the Chinese, for the Hong Kong protesters to be invoking these forces is an indication to me that they're not ready to go home, and is an indication to me also that, knowing what I do about the Chinese government, they shouldn't go home.
Well, Bill, President Trump is engaged in some high-stakes negotiations right now with the communist government in China involving trade. He's made accusations about them over the last couple of years, including intellectual property rights infringement and theft and espionage and currency manipulation and subsidizing of Chinese companies to the detriment of American companies. And he has slapped a bunch of tariffs on, which the Chinese have retaliated with tariffs of their own. Another wave of them just hit. Another wave is scheduled for December. If you're President Trump at this point and you see what's going on at Hong Kong, what do you say or not say about that situation?
That's an excellent question. My position, if I was the president, would be to look at this as an internal dispute on the part of the Chinese people. With that said, at stake are some foundational principles that our country lives by. And while I certainly don't think it's grounds for the United States to go to war to protect or to provide what the Hong Kong protesters are looking for, I do think that it would be morally, practically indefensible to not at least offer moral support, which is more than Barack Obama did during the Iranian uprising in 2009. That could have made a difference. That could have taken the biggest enemy we have off the board, but didn't happen. So I think as long as the reaction and the tempo remain more or less where it is, then the president's probably wise not to do anything. He's probably wise enough to know that if he were to come out strongly in favor of the Hong Kong protesters, that would actually hurt the Hong Kong protesters. That would stiffen the resolve of the Chinese government, and that's certainly understandable. If somebody basically said to our government, "Hey, you can't do this as far as your borders are concerned," or whatever, natural reaction of both the American government and the American people would be to say, "Don't you tell us what to do," and then go even further in that direction. So as long as things stay relatively peaceful, I think Donald Trump's probably walking the right side of that line. If China decides to go full Tiananmen Square on these people, then the president's response is going to have to become not only an economic response, but a moral and political response. And I think the most important thing to say about a scenario like that is that we had, I can remember from Tiananmen Square, I can remember blurry video image of tanks or tracked vehicles in motion in the square, and everybody remembers that smuggled footage of that lone Chinese protester stopping a line of tanks. However, if that were to happen today, things would be very, 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 very different. There would be thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of cameras running at the same time, distributing those images to the world, and would reveal the true face of the Chinese Communist government, which they've been very careful to conceal. They're not nice people, and they have no concern for their people. And the simple evidence of this is to look at the levels of pollution that they maintain in their cities, which are not only harmful, they're practically fatal. And a government that's ready to put up billboards or LED platforms showing a sunny, clear sky, so it's something they can look at through the smog, is a government that's more determined to establish its political presence in the Far East, challenge the United States, and if it means that millions of their people have to die, well, that seems like a small price to pay. This has always been the way that China operates, and Hong Kong is a precisely valuable example of how China could have gone and could still go. Hong Kong had the benefit of 99 years of British rule and a very, very, very loose reins in terms of laws and regulations. The Chinese people in Hong Kong developed and became accustomed to freedoms that we in the West are accustomed to, and they're not ready to submit to the slavery of the mainland, and I don't blame them one bit.
Well, with the knowledge that unfolding events can rapidly overtake pre-recorded programming, we tend to anchor our commentary here in enduring principles. That's why the folks at BillWhittle.com have agreed to sponsor this kind of programming. Some of them are monthly members, some of them annual, but all of them voluntarily give of their own means to be able to sustain this enterprise, and we're grateful to them. If you would like to join that team and amplify the voice of liberty around the world, go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thank you.